Alrighty, folks. Welcome to Technical Knockout the MMA Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Hussein, and today we are doing the end of year awards for 2024. Let's, give everybody. We made it, guys. We made it. One more year under the sun. Big year for MMA. There was a lot of great fights this year. A lot of crazy performances. A lot of awesome storylines. And just overall a great year for MMA and for the UFC. So without further ado, let's get into it, So end of year awards, we did it last year. We did it the year before. This year, I'm really looking forward to it because there was a lot. Whoa, oh, Maron. I fell. Sorry about that, boys. All right, so end of year awards 2024. We made it, baby. It was a good year. It was a good year for MMA. It was a good year for the UFC. There was a lot of awesome fights. A lot of awards to give out this year. Where should we start? Let's start with Fight of the Year. I think it's a fair enough place to start more than anything, considering that this podcast is about fights and fighting. The best fight of 2024 is probably the most heralded category, so let's get the meat and potatoes out of the way, and then we'll work our way down to the appetizers and fixins, or whatever they say. I don't know, whatever. I have a few nominations here listed. I will lay out all the options, briefly talk about each one, and then come up with our winner. So, best fight of the year. We're going to start with Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. Now, I was at this fight live, so I was a bit biased picking it here, but it was an awesome matchup where we saw a great champion in Islam Makhachev get pretty much pushed to the limit by the grizzled veteran challenger in Dustin Poirier. Now, Makhachev did end up pulling out that submission in the 5th round, but Poirier was, bloodying him up. He was defending the takedowns well, especially in those middle rounds, and had a great account for himself, I think. And, Poirier has now since mentioned that he wants to take one more fight and then retire, but I do feel like this was a perfect swan song for him as far as a underdog performance where he, really showed a lot of heart and had great success against a guy who everybody thought would beat him up in 2 rounds, myself included. So shouts out to Islam and Dustin for putting on that fight. Islam was able to, pull out that finish in the last round. I personally had him up 3-1 going into the 5th. But, any other judge could have had it 2-2 or 3-2, or I'm sorry, 3-1 for Dustin. So, I mean, maybe not 3-1 for Dustin, but they could have scored it 2-2 for sure. So, him thinking that he needs a finish in that 5th round and then getting it, hats off to the champ. The guy earned it. So that's our first nomination. Next nomination would be Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. I think this is going to be on a lot of people's list for Fight of the Year, but in my opinion, it was a bit too one-sided for me. Max was pretty much putting on a masterclass. Justin Gaethje had a couple moments. There was that knockdown where the cage saved Max, but besides that, it was really the Max Holloway show. The ending was absolutely phenomenal and likely going to be our knockout of the year. But for me, I feel like the fight didn't live up to what I would consider to be Fight of the Year. That being said, it was an awesome fight and definitely one that will go down in the history books forever just for that finish alone. Next, we have Orolbai versus Rebecki. This was a awesome fight from a couple weeks ago that built up really well. First round went to Rebecki, second round went to Orolbai, and then the third round, Rebecki was whooping his ass, and then Orolbai won the last half of the round. So it was a very, very tightly contested fight, a very close fight, but Mateusz Rebecki was able to get that victory in the underdog spot there. It was an awesome fight, man. Really incredible fight, and when I was watching it, I felt like it was one of the first fights I've ever seen. That feeling like when you first started watching MMA and you were like, holy shit, this is insane. Like, that's the kind of, chills that I got watching that fight. So I felt I needed to put it up for the nomination. Next nomination we have is Davison Figueiredo versus Petr Yan. This was another incredible fight. A little bit one-sided, but certainly competitive throughout. Both guys showed great adjustments to each other's games. Both guys showed wrinkles that they've always shown, but they showed it in different contexts in this fight. Figueiredo landed some beautiful takedowns, landed some awesome straight rights, dropped Yan at one point. Yan was landing incredible uppercuts, the clinch trips that he has, of course. It was a really beautiful fight where we saw two fighters who have very interesting and entertaining styles meet and use those styles to pick each other apart. Petr Yan did end up getting the victory there, and it was well-deserved, but regardless, an awesome fight. Not sure if I'd put it as Fight of the Year, but definitely deserved the nomination. John Silva versus Drew Dober. Again, this was an incredible barn burner matchup between two guys who really just love to entertain. John Silva ended up getting the TKO by way of cut in the third round, I believe. But regardless, that whole fight was just, barn burner, man. The spinning elbows that Silva lands, the hooks from both guys. We didn't see a ton of grappling in this fight, if any. I don't remember any grappling exchanges, really. But regardless, it was a phenomenal fight. Tatsuro Taira versus Brandon Royval is another great fight that we got late in the year. Back and forth fight, really close, really fun. This is one of those fights where, and in general, these kind of fights are my favorite. Historically, fights like Carlos Condit versus Robbie Lawler, fights like Johnny Hendricks versus Robbie Lawler, Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard. These fights where it's 5 rounds and one guy wins the first round, the next guy wins the second, next guy wins the third, next guy wins the fourth, and then, the fifth is what decides it. Adesanya versus Gastelum is another great example of that type of storyline to a fight. And Tatsuro Taira versus Brandon Royval fit that bill, in my opinion. Royval winning the first, third, and fifth rounds, and Tatsuro winning the second and fourth. Great fight. Again, a veteran versus a young, hungry prospect. The veteran turned back the prospect in this matchup in a split decision, but I felt like Brandon Royval did enough to win that fight. And this is another fight. This is a fight that gets this nomination not only for the barn burner action, but because there was grappling exchanges that were really exciting, there was striking exchanges that were really exciting, there was clinch exchanges that were really exciting. Altogether, every phase of the fight these guys went to, they brought it, and they fought their hearts out. And definitely deserves a nomination for Fight of the Year. Now, the last nomination is Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovic. This was at UFC 306 at the Sphere. I think it was 306. Yeah, I think it was 306. Well, either way, it was at the Sphere. Phenomenal fight, man. I mean, just right from the bell, these guys are throwing incredible combinations at each other. Non-stop action, non-stop pace. Again, not a ton of grappling in this fight, but just an absolute barn burner, man. If you guys are going to watch any fight from this list, I highly recommend you watch this one, Zellhuber versus Ribovic. Both guys taking lumps out of each other and very competitive rounds. I felt as though it was 1-1 going into the third, and then that third round, Esteban Ribovic really put the pace on Daniel Zellhuber and had him stumbling around the ring. And Zellhuber, even while hurt, was coming back with some great strikes of his own. We saw some really beautiful boxing combinations in this fight. We saw some really beautiful setups for the kicks. Again, not a ton of grappling, but the few grappling exchanges that we saw were tightly competitive. And for me, because this fight was bell-to-bell action, because it was edge of your seat the whole time, we saw two guys who, Zellhuber, I think, has a bit of shine. Ribovic, a little bit of shine from getting that head kick knockout over Terrence McKinney, but relatively speaking, compared to the other names on this list, these are two relatively unknown fighters, and they absolutely put on a war. They put on, in my opinion, what should be the Fight of the Year, and we are going to give the Fight of the Year award to Daniel Zellhuber and Esteban Ribovic for their war at the Sphere earlier this year. So congratulations to them. Incredible fight. Highly recommend you guys check that one out. This was the fight that when I rewatched all these fights, it stood out the most to me. I think with the context of Islam and Dustin, with the context of even Taira versus Royval or Max and Justin, you can think that in the moment that those fights were better or, standouts. I mean, they certainly are standouts, but If you strip away all the extraneous factors, the name value, the championship potential, etc., these guys put on an absolute war. So shouts out to Ribovic and Zellhuber, and you guys got our fight of the year for 2024. Congratulations. All right, let's move down the list. Now we have the best women's fight of the year. First nomination, you have Amanda Lemos versus Mackenzie Dern. Classic matchup of striker versus grappler. Lemos was dropping Dern constantly. Dern was throwing up some insane scrambles and had her in some really close submission attempts. There were several points at this fight where either woman looked like they could have been finished, and for that reason, it definitely deserved the nomination for best women's fight. Next, you have Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan. This is the only fight I've ever seen where somebody got finished multiple times and it went to decision. It was insane. There was a point where Weili knocked out Yan Xiaonan and she stumbled on her feet. Stumbled on her hands and knees to her corner. Her cornerman picked her up, brought her to the corner. There was another point where Weili had her choked out at the end of the round. And again, Yan Xiaonan barely made it to the corner. But what is really remarkable about this fight, besides those two near finishes for Weili, was that Yan Xiaonan won the next round after almost getting finished twice. Like, both times. She won the following round. It was incredible. Her striking looked so good against Zhang Weili. And Yan Xiaonan, I think, certainly can be the champion one day. She wasn't able to realize it here against Weili, but my goodness, what a competitive fight. What an awesome fight. And I feel as though it definitely got overshadowed by the Max versus Justin adrenaline dump that they had right before this title fight at UFC 300. So it kind of got lost in the shuffle there. If you rewatch it, the crowd doesn't react as much as they did to the fight before it. And I think it's because they just had this huge adrenaline dump with that awesome knockout for Holloway and Justin. But regardless, again, in a vacuum, phenomenal fight. Then the last contestant is Irene Aldana versus Norma Dumont. This was a blood and guts war between Norma Dumont and Irene Aldana, where Dumont really just beat the piss out of Aldana. Aldana, the consummate tough customer, constantly marching forward, throwing leg kicks, throwing jabs, throwing straights, but Norma Dumont just too quick to the punch and was outlanding her there. But at the end of it, we saw a canvas of blood painted by way of Irene Aldana's face. And for that reason, for that violence, for that awesome attrition that she was able to put on, this deserved the nomination for Best Women's Fight. But I think you can tell from my descriptions of the fights that the winner for this category is going to be Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan. My goodness, what a fucking fight. Highly recommend you guys rewatch this one. There's a good chance that you also fell into the adrenaline dump that followed Holloway and Gaethje and weren't able to fully appreciate this fight while it happened. So I highly recommend you go back on ESPN or Fight Pass or wherever and check it out because it really holds up and it's an insane fight with a lot of dramatic turns. I might put it over Zellhuber versus Ribovic, but that's a conversation for a different day, I suppose. All right, let's go down to best knockout of the year. I think that this one is a very easy category to answer. I think everybody's going to have this answer, but let's go down the list for the contestants anyway. You have Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint Denis. Prospect versus a veteran again. Benoit Saint Denis came out really hot and was fighting like he didn't know how to pace himself, honestly, and he started to get exhausted, and that's when Poirier started to find success, and Poirier was able to crack him with that left hook and drop him, and it was a beautiful knockout from an awesome, comeback and a consummate professional in Dustin Poirier. So awesome knockout there. Definitely one to rewatch. Next, you had Vinicius Oliveira versus Bernardo Sopage. Now, this is another fight between two relatively unknown fighters, but this finishing sequence was absolutely insane, dude. Like, he throws a leg kick that spins. So Oliveira throws a leg kick that spins Sopage out of his stance, and Sopage is forced to back his way to the fence. And then Oliveira runs up into this flying knee, and it's just a thing of beauty, man. He just completely deadens him. He was kind of playing with his food at that point, but that finishing touch was absolutely incredible. So certainly a contender for knockout of the year. Next, you have Shi Ming versus Feng Xiaonan. Um, Again, crazy comeback, where Shiming was getting dogged this whole fight, honestly. She was the smaller fighter. The other girl was a lot taller, a lot longer. Shiming was not able to get inside. The other girl kept her on the end of her punches. When Shiming finally did get the takedown, she was on top for about 30 seconds before getting swept and beat up in the mount position. So going into the third round, it was like, fuck, like, what am I going to do here, you know? And what she did was knock the bitch out cold. So Shiming throws a right hand to the body, right hook to the body, and homegirl ducks under it. She feints it again and throws up the head kick and just absolutely deadens her. I was watching this one live. It was in China at like 6 in the morning. I was the degenerate that I am, and I really thought that I saw somebody die in the octagon for the first time. Fang was out for a long, long time. It was scary as fuck. So, you know, hats off to Shiming, and that certainly deserves a Knockout of the Year nomination. But the one that's going to be on everybody's list, and I'm sure you guys aren't surprised to hear it, is Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. Now, this is a crazy, crazy decision to make for Max Holloway in a fight where he was up essentially 4 rounds to none. He points to the floor in the middle of the octagon and goes toe to toe and squares off with Justin Gaethje, who, you know, historically is one of the hardest hitters in MMA history, in lightweight history for sure, but in MMA history, pound for pound altogether for sure. And Holloway deads him in the middle of the octagon. It was absolutely insane. He did not need to do that. He could have just circled and won the fight handedly, but instead he went like a fucking legend that he is and did the fucking point down shit and really fucking did it. Knocked the dude out in the last second of the round. Absolutely electric moment, insane. All the mics pop. The crowd is going crazy. We went crazy watching it. Anybody who, you know, any MMA fan who was watching that fight, you know, just thinking about it, I'm getting chills. So that definitely got the Knockout of the Year. It has to be Knockout of the Year. There's no other chance. You know what I mean? I mean, the closest thing would be that Vinicius Oliveira versus Sopaj knockout, because that flying knee was an absolute thing of beauty. And that sequence that he threw with the left hook and the leg kick might be my favorite finishing sequence in MMA history, or, you know, it's up there. It's one of my favorite finishing sequences. But that Holloway Gaethje fight, with the context, you know, with how the look of Justin Gaethje flat on the canvas at the end of it, just absolutely insane. I mean, we've never seen Gaethje get knocked out like that. The only other time he got finished like that was from Eddie Alvarez, and even still, it was like, you know, he got up right away and was like, you son of a, you know, we talked about it before, but this one he was out cold, and you know, hats off to Max Holloway. Certainly deserved that Knockout of the Year, and he got it. All right, so next we got Submission of the Year. Got a few different nominations here for different reasons. We'll start off with Islam versus Dustin. I largely put this fight in here because of the magnitude of the fight. It was the end of a war, you know, like I said earlier, it was a 2-2 fight going into the fifth, maybe 3-1 for Islam, but, you know, Islam felt that he needed to do something big in that last round to steal it away, and he did. He got that insane takedown. The takedown that led to the submission was absolutely a thing of beauty. He rips out the single leg and does like an inside-out reap on it, and, you know, just follows him to the ground, snaps him up in a dart stroke, which, you know, when Dustin Poirier started his career, that was his go-to submission. So just gives a little bit more weight to the submission here. And Islam defends his belt with that choke in the fifth round. So awesome, awesome finish. Definitely deserves a nomination for Submission of the Year. Next, we have Whitaker versus Chimaev. Again, this is another fight that, even though the submission wasn't like some crazy outlandish thing, it was about the magnitude of the fight. It was the quick tap, and it was the guy who was getting tapped out, man. Whitaker is so tough. I don't think he's ever been submitted. I'm pretty sure he's never been submitted. And for, you know, Chimaev to get to that position, squeeze his teeth in, was absolutely brutal. I don't think I would put this as Submission of the Year, but given the magnitude of the fight, given the, you know, the status of Robert Whitaker, you have to put this up for consideration. Next, we have Duplessis versus Adesanya. Again, a huge fight. This is the first time Israel Adesanya got submitted. It was a dogfight. The whole fight was back and forth again, and Du Plessis got that takedown off of pretty much falling on his face and then worked his way up to the choke. It was crazy. Rear naked choke, so nothing insane as far as technique goes, but still a really awesome finish and a great candidate for submission of the year. Then you have Ortega versus Rodriguez 2. This was an awesome comeback from Brian Ortega. He was getting beat up in this fight, man. He was getting beat up pretty bad, and he ended up coming back, getting that takedown on Yair Rodriguez, and kind of just dog walking him from there on, and finishing it off with that arm triangle. Great performance from Brian Ortega, vintage Brian Ortega performance, getting that third round submission. So that deserved the nomination as well. And our last nomination would be Sergey Spivak versus Marcin Tybura. It was a really sneaky armbar that Spivak caught Tybura in, and it was the first time we've seen Tybura get tapped out, which, again, I always feel like adds a lot of weight to the finish. I think this one kind of flew under the radar because it was on top of a fight night that was really boring, but that last finish was a very sneaky one, and I feel like it definitely deserved the nomination for submission of the year. Now, that being said, I'm really not sure who to give this one to, but after talking about it here on the pod, I am going to tip the hat and give the Submission of the Year award to Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. Again, not only because of the magnitude of the fight, it certainly adds to it. It was a huge fight, pay-per-view headliner. It was a war. It was the end of the war. Islam felt like he needed the finish. He probably could have just won the 5th round, but, you never know the judges these days, so him going for the finish and getting it was insane. The takedown that led to it was a real thing of beauty. Poirier I don't think he's been submitted before. I can't remember him ever getting submitted. Well, he got submitted by Khabib. Yeah, and Oliveira. Although Poirier has been submitted before, for him to get finished by Darshchoke is a little bit of extra poeticity. It's more poetry for the fight. So I'm giving it to Islam for his Darshchoke over Dustin Poirier in the 5th round of their war. Congratulations, Islam Makhachev, submission of the year. All right, we've got a few other categories here. There's a lot of categories we're going to go down. Before we get into some of the more outlandish ones or the weirder ones, let's talk about our Fighter of the Year. So, Fighter of the Year, you have a lot of nominations for this. Obviously, we're doing Male Fighter of the Year and then Female Fighter of the Year. For Fighter of the Year, top nomination, I think everybody's probably going to give it to him, is Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira defended his belt 3 times this year against Yuri Prochazka, Jamal Hill, and Khalil Rountree. Prochazka and Hill, some of the best fighters in light heavyweight in the last 5 years. Khalil Rountree just kind of made his way up there, but put on an awesome performance. And I think the real merit that you can give Pereira for these defenses is that he took a lot of them on short notice, and he did great work, man. Pereira is a monster. I wouldn't be shocked if they named him as like the biggest star of the UFC right now. It certainly feels that way, Shama. So certainly deserves our Fighter of the Year nomination. Next, you have Ilia Topuria for knocking out Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway both in the same year. Just insane, dude. I mean, those are 2 of the greatest fighters in MMA history and the 2 greatest fighters in featherweight history, in my opinion. I mean, Aldo as well, of course, but those are 2 of the 3 best, and Topuria knocked them both out this year. To be the first person to knock out Max Holloway, that deserves an award in its own right. But, starting the year off getting that knockout victory over Volkanovski. Say what you will about the short notice nature of the fight, or relatively short notice nature, but Topuria was able to find that knockout and had a really good performance in that fight. And he certainly deserves nomination for Fighter of the Year. Next, you have Merab Dvalishvili for beating up, was it Henry Cejudo he fought earlier in the year? Let me just double check that. Yes, so he beat Henry Cejudo and he beat Sean O'Malley. Now, the Henry Cejudo fight was an absolute barn burner. The Sean O'Malley fight, not a barn burner by any stretch of the imagination, but an incredibly well designed and well executed game plan from Rob Dvalishvili, and in my opinion, that earns him the nomination for Fighter of the Year. Next, you have Dricus du Plessis, who won the belt against Sean Strickland and then beat Israel Adesanya later in the year. Two huge wins over the last two guys to hold the middleweight belt. So certainly deserves a nomination for Fighter of the Year there. The guys had an awesome 2024. And last but not least, Diego Lopez. Now, Diego Lopez is different than the other guys on this list because he's not a champion right now, but he's had an incredible year, man. A lot of finishes, a lot of huge fights, and finishing out the year with that victory over Brian Ortega where he knocked him out and then woke him up with his punches in the same combination. It was insane. And then just kind of beat the piss out of him for the next two rounds. Diego Lopez certainly deserves a shout out for Fighter of the Year. But in my opinion, will probably likely get the Breakout Fighter of the Year more likely than anything. Now, let's give it up to our Fighter of the Year for this year. We are giving Fighter of the Year to Ilia Topuria. You got it, man. You got it. I mean, come on, bro. If you knock out the two of the three consensus GOATs of your division, and they're still in their prime. I mean, you could say what you will about Holloway or Volkanovski not being in their prime anymore. They are still in their prime. They still beat 99% of featherweights, but the 1% that they can't beat is named Ilia Topuria. So Ilia Topuria gets our nomination and our award for Fighter of the Year for 2024. Alex Pereira, very, very close second. Next, we have Female Fighter of the Year. First, you have Kayla Harrison making her UFC debut and beating Holly Holm and Ketlin Vieira, and lining herself up for a title shot. And I think that she's the biggest star on this list for sure. Next, you have Zhang Wei Li. Although she only had one title defense against Yan Xiaonan this year, it was an awesome defense. And in my opinion, she stands at the pinnacle of women's MMA as it stands right now. Pound for pound number one in my eyes, so she deserves that nomination. Vina Jandiroba for putting herself in position to fight for the title and getting a sick finish over, what was it? Shit, I just lost it. Amanda Lemos in her last fight. Making her case for Fighter or Female Fighter of the Year for sure, and showing some really great improvements to her game. And for somebody who I think nobody really took a sniff at as a serious contender last year, for her now to be essentially the consensus number one. I mean, it's her or Tatiana Suarez, who Suarez has been inactive. I think speaks wonders to Jandiroba's game and her improvements for this year. And last but not least, you have Dakota Dacheva, the only non-UFC fighter on this list, but she took over the PFL this year and ended up the year finishing Tyler Santos, who a lot of people felt like beat Valentina Shevchenko when they fought. If not, could have beat her if it wasn't for that huge headbutt that Valentina landed in the third round, I think. So Dakota Dacheva certainly deserves nomination for Female Fighter of the Year as well. Sets herself up for an awesome 2025 and wins $1 million at the end of 2024. What more can you ask for, So for me, this comes down to two fighters. It comes down to Dakova and it comes down to Kayla Harrison. Now, if we're looking at strength of competition, Dakota, of course, fought a couple of bums in the PFL, but she finished the year very strong, finishing Tyler Santos. First time I've ever seen Tyler Santos get finished. I don't know, maybe she got finished on the regional scene, but in the UFC she didn't. And Kayla Harrison, on the other hand, for getting two huge marquee wins over top flight names in Holly Holm and Ketlin Vieira. Although not the most exciting performances against Ketlin Vieira, it looked like she kind of ran into a wall there. She was able to get the finish against Holly Holm and set herself up for a huge fight against Juliana Pena next year. In my opinion, our Female Fighter of the Year is going to have to be Dakota Dacheva. As far as a breakout fighter, somebody that nobody knew in 2023 or 2020, in 2023, and now in 2024, ending the year as the PFL champion, and a lot of people thinking that she could give anybody in the UFC a lot of problems. I'm giving it to Dakota, man. She earned it, How many finishes this year? 3-4 finishes this year. Finishing it off, taking out Tyler Santos. You really can't ask for much more. In my opinion, I rate Tyler Santos higher than this version of Holly Holm or Ketlin Vieira. And either way, her performance against Santos was better than either of Kayla's performances against Vieira or Holly Holm. So congratulations to Dakota Dacheva, 2024 Female Fighter of the Year. Let's go. All right, next we have the comeback of the year. Our first nomination is Mearshart versus Shabazian. You have Gerald Mearshart versus Edmund Shabazian. And this is a classic Gerald Mearshart fight. Classic Edmund Shabazian fight, too. Shabazian starts off the fight hot, rocks Mearshart over and over. He's much faster than him on the feet, like disgustingly faster than him on the feet. But he gets taken down, and he gets exhausted, and Mearshart finds the submission. Second round, I believe. You know, easy dub for Mearshart. Not actually easy because he took a lot of punishment, but a classic victory and a classic comeback for Gerald Mearshart. Now, the next one is going to be Joe Pyfer versus Jack Hermansson. Joe Pyfer, everybody thought was going to just smoke everybody, run up to the top of middleweight. Jack Hermansson had other plans. Pyfer started out the fight very hot, jabbing and one-twoing and beating up Hermansson by being the much faster and bigger, more physically imposing fighter. And Hermansson won the last 3 rounds very cleanly with great technique, great movement around the ring, and finding his own takedowns there towards the end of the fight. Another classic veteran performance from Jack Hermansson, akin to that Mearshart performance to Shabazian. Next, you have Brian Ortega versus Yair Rodriguez. Yair was beating the shit out of Brian Ortega early in the fight, and Ortega started to come on strong in that second round and eventually found that finish in the third. And it was beautiful comeback from Brian Ortega for somebody who was getting absolutely smoked by the much faster fighter early to find those takedowns, slow down the pace of the fight, and cook Yair with his ground and pound and with that final submission attempt of the arm triangle. Definitely deserving of the nomination of Comeback of the Year. And last but not least, we have Shi Ming versus Feng Xiaonan again. I described this fight early in the pod, but I'll do it again. Feng had this girl dead to rights, man. She was landing her jabs. She was the much taller, longer fighter. Shi Ming was like a plus 575, something like that. She was trying to get inside the whole fight and just getting stopped, by the jab, by the knees up the middle, by the uppercuts, by the front kicks. And she finally did get a takedown in that second round, got to the top position, was starting to do some work, and got swept and mounted and was just getting beat up on. And it was like, man, this girl, she can't grapple her, she can't strike her. What is she going to do? And what she did was knock her the fuck out. It was crazy, dude. Third round, she lands that right hand to the body. Feng drops her guard a bit. She feints it, throws up the right kick behind it, and absolutely deads her opponent. And Shi Ming gets her hands raised. And again, I thought she killed the girl. The girl was laying there for a long time. They had to get the stretcher. They went to commercial. They came back. They showed Shi Ming in the corner like this. And anytime you see a fighter look like that after they knock somebody out, it was a scary knockout because they're scared. They feel bad, and that's not a good sign. So they show her in that pose, and then they're like, oh, they're still tending to Fang. We are gonna go back to commercial. They went to commercial twice. This girl was still knocked out. Insane comeback. It looked like she was out of the fight in every phase of the fight to get that knockout victory, that comeback victory in the third round. Absolutely deserving, and the winner of our Comeback of the Year for 2024. Congratulations, Shi Ming. You got it. Next, we have Breakout Fighter of the Year. First up, we have Joaquin Buckley. My opinion, Joaquin Buckley, had a decent 2023. He's been in the UFC for a few years. He had that awesome knockout over Impa Kasangane. But in 2024, going 4-0 and getting finishes over a lot of those guys, knocking out Stephen Thompson and Colby Covington. I mean, the Colby Covington one was by a cut, but he was beating the shit out of him the whole fight. Certainly deserving of our Breakout Fighter of the Year. Now puts himself in a top 5 or top 6 position to start 2025. And I never thought I would say that about Joaquin Buckley. So congratulations, Buckley, for being a great breakout fighter and earning that nomination. John Silva is next. Somebody nobody heard about before 2024, at least nobody that I know of. John Silva finished this year with 3 knockouts, 3 awesome knockouts, over Weston Wilson, over Drew Dober, and over Charles Jourdain. Being the first guy to knock out Charles Jourdain and, warming up to all of our hearts. So definitely deserves a nomination for Breakout Fighter of the Year for John Silva. Next, you have a guy coming out of the same camp as John Silva, and that is Carlos Prates. Another guy that nobody really knew coming into 2024, but finishes the year with three very strong knockouts, finishing Charles Radke, Neil Magny, and Li Zhang all by knockout. This guy seems to have the death touch, and I think is on the short list of people who I'm really excited to see in 2025 and who I think may be able to realize gold, if not put themselves in a position to get to the belt in the following year. So, certainly deserving of that nomination for Carlos Prates on Breakout Fighter of the Year. But our winner and our final nomination, and I think will probably be everybody's nomination and award winner for Breakout Fighter 2024, it has to be Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes did fight in the UFC in 2023. He lost a close decision to Movsar Evloev, a very contentious decision in which he came in on like a week's notice, I believe, and then finished 2023 with a submission victory over Pat Sabatini. And comes into 2024 and just fucking beats the brakes off of everybody he puts in front of him. Sadiq Youssef, a couple other guys, Brian Ortega ending the year out, and yeah, positions himself in the top five, and who a lot of people think should be next in line for Ilia Topuria at featherweight if Topuria stays at featherweight. Diego Lopes, our breakout fighter of the year, man, for somebody who was 1-1 in the UFC coming into 24, and now at the end of 2024 is gonna have a title shot next year. You have to give it to breakout fighter. You have to give the breakout fighter of the year to him. So shout out Diego Lopes. His haircut won our hearts over. So there you go. Awesome striking, awesome grappling, and a great fighter. Very exciting the whole time through. All right, so let's keep going down the list. Next, we have prospect of the year. Now, my what's the word? Fuck. My conditions, qualifications, if you will, for prospect of the year. You can't have a number next to your name. You can't be ranked. If you're ranked, you're not a prospect. Now you're a contender. Um, and you can't have been in the UFC in 2023. You must have debuted in 2024. Now, within those parameters, we have four names. We have John Silva, who we mentioned earlier. Awesome, 3 knockouts in 2024. No ranking, going across from featherweight and lightweight, super exciting fighter. Definitely deserving a prospect of the year nomination. Vinicius Oliveira, who had that insane knockout over Bernardo Sopage and then another victory earlier in the year, certainly deserving of that prospect of the year. You have Shara Butpin Magomedov, who is a huge asshole outside of the ring, but in the ring is a very exciting fighter and really fun to watch. Throws a lot of really interesting kicks on the back foot. Ended that year 2024 with a awesome double spinning back fist knockout over Armin Petrosian, who I rate fairly highly. So I put a lot of stock into that victory for Shara Bullet. And last but not least, you have Peyton Talbot, who is a bantamweight who has another few finishes in 2024 and seems to just be a really cool customer, man. And I'm just really excited to see where Talbot goes because he seems to have a very well-rounded game, power in his hands, cool submissions, good grappling. More than anything, though, he has a very level head in there, and you can tell that he doesn't let the fight game get to him in a sense. He seems just in the driver's seat the whole time. Very confident guy. And I'm really excited to see what he does in 2025. And, that being said, I think it comes down to two guys for me. It's going to be either John Silva or Peyton Talbot. John Silva, again, super exciting, but doesn't seem to have the breadth of the game that Peyton Talbot has. Although he has beaten better guys, I am going to give it to Peyton Talbot. He's lined up to fight Hani Barcelos next year. I think he's going to smoke Barcelos. I wouldn't be surprised if they give him somebody like, I don't know, like a Kyler Murray or a Rob Font in his next fight, and then we see him fighting for the title at the end of 2025 or 2026. Prospect of the year, Peyton Talbot, and, regardless of inside the cage, he's also really cool outside of the cage. He's a skateboarder. He makes really interesting short videos that you can check out on his Instagram, and just deserving of our prospect of the year for 2024. Congratulations, Peyton Talbot. All right, so we've got a few other categories we're going to go through here. We did Fighter of the Year. Let's do Champion of the Year. It's Alex Pereira. I mean, to defend your belt 3 times, 2 of those being on short notice, knocking out Yuri Prochazka, knocking out Jamal Hill, knocking out Khalil Roundtree in an awesome fight. It's got to be Alex Pereira. But the other nominations were Alexandre Pantoja for also defending his belt multiple times this year, and Ilya Taporia for winning the belt and then knocking out Max Holloway. But to no one's surprise, Alex Pereira is our 2024 Champion of the Year. Congratulations, Pereira. Shama. Now we have there's a lot of other ones we can do. Let's see. Before we get into cards and rounds, let's stay on the topic of fighters themselves. Let's talk about the Resurgence of the Year, the Phoenix Award, we like to call it. Now, 2023, we gave it to Sean Strickland for, getting the belt in that year, and the previous year not doing so well, finishing that 2022 with the loss to Jared Cannonier. In 2024, we have a few different candidates. We have Kai Kara France, who lost a close decision to Amir Albazi last year, but this year knocked out Steve Ursig, and in my opinion, looked like he turned a corner, and certainly set himself up for a title shot in 2025. Pardon me. We have Joaquin Buckley, who did not have a bad 2023, but in 2024 we saw him have a stellar year at welterweight, going 4-0 and getting 2 knockouts over top 10 talents in Stephen Thompson and Colby Covington, 2 divisional standouts for a long time. And last but not least, we have Youssef Zalal, who was not even in the UFC in 2023. He got cut in the UFC after losing 3 hard fights to really good fighters. And when he was in the UFC initially, he looked like a decisioner, a decision, what do they call it? Decisionator. And, not really having a ton of killer instinct in there, had a well-rounded game, but nothing that really stood out. In 2024, he comes back to the UFC after getting some wins on the regional scene and looks a completely different fighter. Now he is always looking for the finish, finishing Jarno Aarons, finishing Jack Shore. The guy, has had an awesome 2024, and in my opinion, certainly deserving of the Phoenix Award, considering that we hadn't even seen him in the UFC in 2023. He had been cut, come back, and now is on a finish streak in the UFC. It's fucking awesome, bro. I mean, what more can you ask for from the guy? So shouts out to Youssef Zalal, definitely deserving of our nomination. And for me, it comes down to either him or Joaquin Buckley. Buckley, in my opinion, I had written off him at middleweight. I thought he was too one-dimensional. He just relied on his explosiveness, on his power. And I never thought he would be ranked. I never thought he would, sniff a title shot. And for him to finish 2024 as, one of the top contenders at welterweight, he still has to beat somebody like, one of these young guys at the top, like, Jack Della Maddalena or Sean Brady or, Leon Edwards or any of these big names at the top of the division. He still needs one of those wins to get the title shot, but he put himself right in that position to be in a title shot in 2025, and that is certainly deserving of the Phoenix Award. On the other hand, Zalal has not reached that height, but coming from less than nothing and ending the year as one of the hottest prospects and a bona fide finisher, certainly deserves the nomination. But ultimately, I think I am going to go with Joaquin Phoenix for our Phoenix Award. Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Buckley. Joaquin Buckley for our Phoenix Award. It makes all the sense in the world. There you go, right there. The name is in the name. Buckley gets our Phoenix Award, Resurgence of the Year. Very akin to Sean Strickland from 2023, so I think it's a fitting person to give to the award. Next up, we have nominations for Worst Fight IQ or Worst IQ Moments this year. Dumbest Decisions, you could call it whatever you want. First up, we have Damon Jackson shooting into Jim Miller's guillotine. Now, Damon Jackson was doing decent on the feet. Miller started to land his own, and he jumped into a takedown right into Jim Miller's favorite choke, into the guillotine, and obviously got guillotined. So bad IQ moment there from Jamie Jackson, but I just needed another nomination. The other nomination and the winner is Gregorio versus Kazama. The entire fight. This fight was a masterclass in idiocy in MMA. This guy Gregorio was beating the shit out of Kazama on the feet, jumped into the guard, and got swept and got beat up. And then next round, beating him up on the feet, jumps into the guard and gets submitted. It was just so stupid, bro. Just back up. Just let the guy up. You don't need to jump on him. Let him up. You were beating him on the feet. You were knocking him around. Stupid, stupid, stupid. And number one for worst IQ of 2024. Congratulations. You guys suck. Next, we have worst fight of the year. We are going to start off hot with Bo Nickal and Paul Craig. Now, I personally felt like Bo Nickal should run through Paul Craig. I thought he was going to knock him out. Thought Paul Craig, his only chances on the ground, and he can't take down Bo Nickal, of course. So what is he going to do? Get knocked out like he always does, right? No. Instead, Bo Nickal spammed the worst overhands I've ever seen, complete windmill punches, and Paul Craig showed off his boxing combinations, which suck. So we ended up with a really shitty fight, where neither guy really pushed the pace, and at the one point where Bo Nickal did hurt Paul Craig, he didn't go for the finish. So just overall, dog shit fight, and certainly a great nomination for worst fight of the year. Next, you have Vitor Petrino versus Tyson Pedro, and this was like watching a little kid try to take on a slider, and he's only nibbling the edges of the thing. It's like, bro, why can't you finish it? You can't finish the slider? Come on, bro. Vitor Petrino should have finished Tyson Pedro multiple times, but instead he just laid on him and fought a horrible fight and, earned himself a shot at worst fight of the year. Next, you have Gregorio versus Kazama, which I just mentioned. Just a baffling masterclass in stupidity for MMA, and ended up being a really bad fight. Although, you can look at it and be like, man, there was knockdowns, there was a finish. How is that the worst fight? Things happen. If you watch it, you're just frustrated the whole time. Like, at least I was. So I don't know about you guys, but I was frustrated. So I had to put that for worst fight because both guys showed incredible moments of idiocy. Next, you have Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa. Worse than having a bad fight like Bo Nickal and Paul Craig is a bad fight where you talk about how the fight's going to be a war, and then it ends up being a stinker. And that's exactly what we got with Strickland and Costa. Now, Costa was coming off of his fight with Robert Whittaker, where he put on a great performance. He looked better than he's ever looked, in my opinion, against Robert Whittaker. And, I thought he was going to bring it to Sean Strickland. I thought Sean Strickland was going to bring it to Paulo Costa, who's always talking about how he's a killer and, I wish I could kill a guy in the octagon, man. You guys, listen, here's the thing, guys. And instead he just jabs and teeps and circles until the last 10 seconds of the fight where he finally threw some combinations and made it exciting. Absolute dog shit fight. I was there live. It sucked the air out of the room. The crowd was very pro Strickland, pro Trump, pro anyone who was American. And by the end of the fight, they turned on Strickland because he fought such a boring fight and disappointed the fans and gets a nomination for worst fight of the year. And last but certainly not least is Muhammad Mokaev versus Manel Kape. Now, you guys remember about 45 seconds ago when I was talking about how a really bad fight is made even worse when guys talk about how much they're going to kill each other before the fight, and then they just don't deliver. This was that in spades, in 10 times, tenfold. Muhammad Mokaev and Manel Kape, they couldn't keep their hands off each other before the fight. Anytime that they were in the apex with each, or the PI, I should say, the Performance Institute, there was clips of them fighting each other in the hotel lobby. There was clips of them fighting each other at the Performance Institute. Manel Kape threw an elbow at Muhammad Mokaev and gave him a cut before his fight with Alex Perez. A lot of bullshit before the fight. They get in the cage. They're talking shit to each other while the guys are announcing them. And then they stare at each other for the first 5 minutes. There must have been maybe 30 strikes thrown in that first round on both sides, combined. Talk about, pulling the rug out from us. Where was all that vinegar? Where was all that, that fucking, that poise, that anger, that ferocity that you guys had for each other for the last 3 months? It wasn't in the cage when they closed the doors. Certainly not. Muhammad Mokaev won the fight very boringly, very close. Stupid fight. Worst fight of the year, 100%. That has to be the worst fight of the year. Congratulations, Muhammad Mokaev, Manel Kape. The fight was so bad, they cut Muhammad Mokaev on a win. A top 10 flyweight. They cut him after a win because he fought such a dog shit fight. Congratulations, you earned it. Worst fight of the year. Boom. Enjoy it. I don't know if it touches Namajunas Esparza from last year. I don't think any fight does. That's probably the worst fight in modern MMA history. But this is damn near it because of how much shit they talked before the fight and how much they did not deliver on fight night. Now, keeping in the line of worst things of the year, let's talk about the worst card of the year. It's Spivak versus Tybura, man. This fight card lasted so long. There was so many decisions. There was a couple of finishes, I think maybe one, until the main event. But not a lot to write home about. Not some crazy barn burners. It's not only that, like, every decision is boring. That's crazy. Because there's some really good fights that go to decision. Some of my favorite fights of all time have went to decision. But this card was just boring fight after boring fight, and then it got to the main event, and it was over in like a minute and a half, and it was a really sneaky submission that we gave credit to earlier for Submission of the Year nomination, but it was an underwhelming card altogether. So that's it. That's your worst card of the year. Congratulations, you got it. Now let's spin it a bit. We're gonna go in a bit of we'll do one more negative category. We got Robbery of the Year. All right, so we have 3 nominations for this. We'll start with the one that's most relevant today, and that is Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov. Now, this was a close fight, but Volkov clearly won rounds 2 and 3, in my opinion, and I think most of the media and fans agree. Gane won the first round, sure, yeah, but he didn't win the second, and he certainly didn't win the third. And the judges gave the decision to Gane, and it was a bad robbery, man, and especially in a top 5 fight like that, where the winner's probably going to get the next title shot. Really stinks when the judges get that wrong. So, Robbery of the Year nomination for Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov 2. The guy that won, Ciryl Gane, got the decision and literally tried to leave the cage because he was upset with his performance, and that just tells you everything you need to know. Next, you have Raquel Pennington versus Juliana Pena, and this is a very strong contender for Robbery of the Year because I watched this fight live, not in person, but while it was happening, and I thought Raquel Pennington won the first round for sure. I thought Juliana Pena certainly won the second and third with her takedowns. Fourth and fifth, Pennington beat the shit out of Pena. She knocked her down. It was the first knockdown in Pennington's career, in her UFC career, I should say. I don't know if she had one on the regional circuit. She was beating the piss out of her. She was stopping the takedown. She was punching her in the face. And it looked just like a veteran performance from the dog in Raquel Pennington. And she, in my opinion, had a great performance that night. Probably one of her best performances in the octagon. And the judges gave it to Juliana Pena. And if you want to talk about high stakes in that Ciryl Gane fight, this was for the belt. This is for the belt. And the winner's going to fight Kayla Harrison, who's one of the biggest names in women's MMA right now. So, huge, robbery there. And it just sucks because although Pena did win 2 rounds of the fight, she did not win the fight. I think everybody knows that. She didn't do any damage. She didn't have any close submission attempts. She just won 2 rounds on her grappling exchanges. She did not do enough to win that first round, in my opinion. And that's what it comes down to, is the first round. Now, that first round was close, but I thought it was clear that Pennington won. She landed the harder strikes. Now, the last nomination is Hanat Fakhretdinov versus Carlos Leal. Now, this was a fight that probably went under a lot of guys' radars for 2024 for robberies. But if you watch this fight, you will be shocked to find out that the winner was Hanat Fakhretdinov, because I watched this fight live while it was happening, and this guy Carlos Leal, who was coming in on short notice, coming up a weight class, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and just beat the piss out of Hanat Fakhretdinov over 3 rounds, was landing thunderous leg kicks, was landing great strikes, defending the takedowns of Fakhretdinov. They're in Abu Dhabi, they go to decision, and they give it to Hanat Fakhretdinov. And one of the judges even gave him a 30-27. Ooh, boy, that stings. Now, this certainly had the lowest stakes out of all the fights we mentioned, but in the other fights that we mentioned, Pena Pennington and Gane Volkov, those guys won a round. Pena won 2 rounds. Gane won the first round. Renat Fakhretdinov didn't win a single round in this fight. He got beat up every round. Every round he got beat up. And the judges gave it to him. So, in my opinion, that has to be robbery of the year. If you want to talk about like the you know, the landscape of the division, if you want to talk about the consequences of the robbery, you have to give it to Pena versus Pennington. But if you want to just look at the fight in a vacuum, which fighter won? It has to be Fakhretdinov versus Leal. There was, in my opinion, there was maybe 2 minutes of the fight that Fakhretdinov won, and it was not enough to win him any round, and it was not enough to win him the fight. And they gave him the performance, they gave him the decision. So, congratulations, Fakhretdinov versus Leal. That is our robbery of the year for 2024. All right. Another negative category before we turn into some more positive ones. We have most likely to lose their title next year. Most likely to lose their title next year. We are going to start with Belal Muhammad, who a lot of people feel as though is a weak champion right now. I don't agree with that sentiment. I think he is a very well-rounded fighter, and his biggest tool that he brings to the cage is his fight IQ and his game planning, which is something that you cannot undersell. You can't understate that. It's a monumental difference between two fighters when they're both coming in prepared, they're both coming in shape, they're both coming athletic, and one of them has a great plan. That guy will win 10 times out of 10. That being said, he's facing a murderer's row at welterweight. You have guys like Carlos Pratas, guys like Jack Della Maddalena, Sean Brady, who he finished, fair enough. Shavkat Rachmanov, Ian Gary, Joaquin Buckley. There's a lot of great fighters at the top of welterweight right now, and I think a lot of those guys can give Belal Muhammad fits if they fight. Even Kamaru Usman. So that's why I nominated him for most likely to lose the title, not because he's a weak champion, but because there is a killer's row, a murderer's row behind him. Next, you have Juliana Pena, who won the fight on a robbery, like we just mentioned, and is slated to fight Kayla Harrison next year. Now, Kayla Harrison is going to be a huge favorite against Juliana Pena when that fight gets booked, so naturally she deserves a nomination for most likely to lose her title. If she does not fight Kayla Harrison, the other fight that may happen is Amanda Nunes. Amanda Nunes is teased coming back. She beat the piss out of Juliana Pena in their rematch. She did lose the first fight by finish, but I feel like that was a fluke. And if they fight a third time, I'd be very happy to pick Amanda Nunes, especially if they give her anywhere near even odds, but I doubt that they will. Next, we have Dricus du Plessis, a guy who has kind of fallen up the mountain, in a sense. A guy who we all looked at as a dog, somebody who doesn't have great technique, but is a great fighter, and super explosive and athletic, and not a very smart fighter, but not very technical either, but he gets the shit done, bro. And, although I don't think he is a weak champion, I think he's a very strong champion. There is, again, a murderer's row behind him, similar to Belal Muhammad. You have Sean Strickland, who he beat by split decision. It was a very close fight. They're going to fight next. And behind him, you have guys like Kyle Baralho, Hamzat Chimaev. There's a lot of great contenders at middleweight who can give Dricus du Plessis a very strong run for his money. So that's why he deserves that nomination. And last but not least is Topuria. But that is not because I think he will lose at featherweight, but he has instead insisted on going up to lightweight. He really wants to fight Islam Makhachev. But he's going to start, he says, by taking on Charles Oliveira or another top 5 lightweight contender and earn his shot at Makhachev, which I really do like. But if he does do that, he's going to vacate his title, which means that he will lose his title, technically speaking. So also deserves a nomination there. I think it would be amiss to not give this award for most likely to lose their title next year to Juliana Pena. In my opinion, she did not do enough to even win the title in the first place, and she has 2 women behind her in Kayla Harrison and Amanda Nunes, who are very likely to fight her for the title next year and very likely to whoop her ass next year. So if Juliana Pena can make it to a fight next year, because she's had a lot of problems with injuries and things in the past, if she can make it to a fight next year, I expect her to lose her title next year. So we're giving the most likely to lose their title to Juliana Pena. Now, on the inverse of that, let's talk about who's most likely to win a title next year. At the top of the list, just in, names that I put down, not in terms of most likely to win, is Manon Fiorot. Manon Fiorot, I feel, has a great chance of winning the title next year. Versus Valentina Shevchenko, I think she has a great opportunity there. Shevchenko is a great champion. She's a very well-rounded fighter, but she is aging. And she's had trouble in the striking departments in these last few fights. She's had to go to her grappling against Alexa Grasso, against Tyler Santos. I think Manon Fiorot will be able to defend the takedowns of Shevchenko and whoop her ass on the feet. And I would pick Manon Fiorot to beat Shevchenko if that fight gets made. I'm not sure if it will get made. I mean, she's the most deserving contender, but they're talking about doing Weili versus Valentina. It doesn't really do anything for me. I think there's a lot of contenders for them at both those divisions, but if Fiorot gets a title shot, I expect her to win. Next, you have Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev just submitted Robert Whittaker, who for a long time has been a top 3 middleweight. And you have to like his chances against anybody at middleweight. I think Duplessis is his toughest fight, or one of his toughest fights. But Chimaev has a great chance of beating him, or Sean Strickland, or anybody else who might be holding the middleweight title next year. So he certainly deserves that nomination. Next, you have Umar Nurmagomedov. Umar Nurmagomedov is slated to fight for the belt in January. So there's a great chance that he wins the belt next year. And he's a favorite in that fight, so he is, by definition, very likely to win the title next year. I think realistically, this is probably our number one option, considering that he has the title fight lined up, and it is a generally tough matchup for Merab. And I certainly feel that Umar can get that victory. So he deserves the shout. Kayla Harrison is next. As we just laid out with Juliana Pena, Kayla Harrison, I believe, would whoop Pena's ass. And she's very likely to win that title next year if that fight gets made. Next, we have Ilia Topuria. Again, most likely to win a title next year, but this time for lightweight. I think he goes up to lightweight in 2025. I think he beats Charles Oliveira. And if they put him in a title shot with Makhachev or Sarukian, I like his chances against either guys. I'm not picking against Topuria against anybody, bro. I'm tired of it. The dude is just so good, so well-rounded, so complete as a fighter. Great grappling, great power in his hands, great boxing combinations, fluid, great movement, fight IQ. It's tough for me to pick against him when he's fighting anybody. So I think he's very likely to win a title next year. And last but not least, we have Kyle Borralho at middleweight. Kyle Borralho, maybe not. I don't know if he'll get the opportunity to fight for the title next year, considering that you have Sean Strickland fighting for it first, and then Khamzat Chimaev's probably right behind him. But Borralho should be there next. If he gets the opportunity to fight for the title, I really like his chances against any of those 3 guys. Against DDP, I think he's the much cleaner fighter. I think he can beat DDP by using his great technique and his great IQ. I think he can definitely beat Sean Strickland. Although I think that would be a tough fight. I just feel like Strickland is too one-dimensional and Borralho is too smart. He's too well-rounded. And if he fights Khamzat Chimaev, I am really interested in that fight because I feel like Borralho is a great defensive grappler. And if he can survive that early onslaught from Chimaev, which I haven't seen anything from him to show me that he can't, I think it gets very interesting in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round. And I like Borralho's chances to win the belt next year. I really do. I think he's a very complete fighter. He is in the top 5, so he's right there for a title shot. The only thing that's keeping me from really putting that stamp on him is I don't know if he'll actually get the opportunity to fight for the belt next year. I think we see Strickland. We are going to see Strickland versus DDP. I believe they made that fight for February. I think they put Chimaev in there next in around June. Chimaev will probably beat the winner of Strickland DDP, unless they do some fucking trilogy or some bullshit like that. And then I think we're going to get Borralho versus Imavov Adesanya winner around that time too, around May or so. And, the winner of that fight, who I believe will be Borralho, will fight for the title at the end of the year around October, November. If that timeline plays out, Borralho, I believe, will get the title by the end of 2025. I just don't know if it's going to play out. So, for me, the most likely to win the title next year is going to have to be either Manon Fiorot or Umar Nurmagomedov, considering that Nurmagomedov is slated to fight for the belt, and Manon Fiorot should be slated for the belt, if not at the beginning of the year, some point in the middle of the year. It's coming down to either one of those two for me, and I think I'm ultimately going to have to pick Umar Nurmagomedov. I think he's going to beat Merab Dvalishvili. I'm going to do a deep dive on that fight soon, but ultimately I feel like Merab has trouble and guys offensively wrestle against him, as we saw in the Ricky Simone fight. Obviously that was early in his career, but we haven't seen anybody attempt it since, and I think he has trouble with kickers, and Umar Nurmagomedov is good offensive wrestling and good kicks. Just doesn't spell a great time for Merab Dvalishvili, in my opinion, and I'm picking Umar to be most likely to win the title next year. Does kind of feel like I'm cheating, considering that he's fighting for the belt already. If you don't want to pick somebody that's already slated to fight for the belt, an outlandish pick, I'm taking Kyle Borralho, man. I really feel like he's going to do it, man. I think he's going to be the champion for a long time. Great jab, great fight IQ, great wrestling, great jiu-jitsu, and I just don't see where anybody's going to beat him. So give me Umar or Kaio to win the belt next year, most likely. All right, next we are going to do the pay-per-view of the year, best pay-per-view of the year. Now, we have 3 nominations first. We have UFC 299, which featured O'Malley versus Chito Vera. There was a lot of other great fights on that card. Let me just pull that up real quick so I can cover the entirety of it. All right, so at the top of the bill, you had O'Malley versus Vera 2, in which we saw O'Malley put on a masterclass, probably his best performance in the octagon to date. You had Dustin Poirier knocking out Benoit Saint Denis, which was an awesome comeback and an awesome knockout. Michael Page beat Kevin Holland. We saw him come to the UFC. We saw Gilbert Burns get finished by Jack Dalla Maddalena in a crazy fight. Petr Yan versus Song Yadong, another awesome performance where we saw a veteran come back to form in Petr Yan. We saw Jota Almeida run into the brick wall that is Curtis Blades' hips and hammer fists. Mateusz Gamrot beat Rafael Dos Anjos. A couple other fights on that card. Michelle Pereira finished Michelle Oleksiejczuk. Rebellis de Spain got that quick knockout in his only UFC victory. And Joanne Wood had a great underdog performance against Marina Moroz. Overall, an awesome card. Definitely deserving of that nomination for Best Pay-Per-View of the Year. Next up, chronologically, we had UFC 300, and I mean, come on, man. For it to be the 300th event, they had to pull out all the stops, and they really did, man. Starting the card with Davison Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt is insane. 2 former champions fighting each other, and it was a great fight. Bobby Green and Jim Miller putting on an awesome fight as well between 2 veterans. Jessica Andrade beating Marina Rodriguez. Renato Moicano with that crazy comeback against Jalen Turner, where Jalen Turner had a huge gaffe as far as the fight IQ goes. That should be a nomination for worst fight IQ moment for sure. Not jumping on Moicano when you have him hurt. Diego Lopez knocked out Sadiq Youssef. That was crazy. Kayla Harrison arrived. Aljamain Sterling made his featherweight debut and looked amazing. Yuri Prochazka and Alexander Rakic had an incredible fight where Prochazka got the knockout. Bo Nickel beat Cody Brundage. Arman Tsarukyan beat Charles Oliveira in a close fight. Holloway and Gaethje had their classic war with that all-time finish. Yan Xiaonan and Zhang Wei Li went to war and had their amazing fight, which we gave Best Women's Fight of the Year. And then you had Alex Pereira knocking out Jamal Hill in that classic viral moment of Pereira pushing off the ref after the nut shot and then knocking out Jamal with that right hook, or the left hook, I should say, left uppercut shovel kind of. So, incredible fight, incredible pay-per-view, and certainly deserving of the nomination for Best Pay-Per-View of the Year. And last but not least, we have UFC 306, which was at the Sphere. This was an awesome fight card, but the real kicker was the graphics package that we had on that card. So, starting at the top, you had Merab versus Sean O'Malley. Really great game plan from Merab. Certainly not a barn burner. Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso, the trilogy fight. Again, great game plan from Shevchenko. Not a barn burner of a fight by any stretch of the imagination. Lopez versus Ortega was a great, very exciting fight, and a great performance from Lopez, who stamped his top 5 status in that matchup. Esteban Ribovic versus Daniel Zellhuber was our fight of the year for 2024, so that instantly bumps the card up a few notches. Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Ode Osborne was a great fight as well. Crazy barn burner back and forth action. Norma Dumont beat up Irene Aldana, which we gave nominations for Best Women's Fight. Ignacio Bahamana's got that sick knockout over Manuel Torres. Caitlin Souza finished Yasmin Uruguay. Joshua Van and Edgar Chairez went to war and had an amazing fight on the prelims. And Raul Rosas beat Orichi Long in the curtain jerker. But the UFC 306, the Sphere, the graphics package that they did, those movies that they did in between the fights, I really felt like it elevated the event to a different level. In my opinion, that earned it the nomination for Fight Card of the Year, or I'm sorry, Pay-Per-View of the Year, and also because of the Ribovich Zellhuber fight and the Van Chairez fight. Those fights were incredible. Now, that being said, our pay-per-view of the year, and to no one's surprise, is going to be UFC 300. The UFC stacked this card. They put a bunch of former champions on there. I think the most champions of any card ever, and it delivered, man. It was a great card. There was a lot of crazy finishes. There was a lot of crazy fights. The Miller Green fight, Holloway Gaethje, Xiaonan versus Wei Li, Moicano Turner, Figueiredo Garbrandt. There was a lot of awesome fights on this card, man, and it certainly deserves the award for best pay-per-view of the year. Next, you have best fight night of the year. There was a few different nominations here. We have Whitaker versus Aliskerov, which was a great card that ended in an awesome finish from a veteran. We had Prates versus Magny, which was stacked with finishes. We had Blanchard versus Furo, also stacked with finishes, although it ended on kind of a sour note with that main event. And then we had Ankalaev versus Walker, another great fight night that was stacked with finishes. And for me personally, I'm going to have to give it to Prates versus Magny. Now, this fight card ended in that awesome finish from Carlos Prates, but it started off with 5 finishes in a row, and 4 of those were in the first round. So, 6 first-round finishes on this card altogether. I mean, what more can you ask for out of a fight night? You know what I mean? You want these fights to be exciting. You want them to be over quickly. There was great fights on the card, and there was great finishes, and I just don't know what more I can ask for as a fight fan, and that's why it's going to have to be our fight night of the year. Congratulations, Carlos Prates versus Neil Magny, and everybody that participated on that card. Next, we have Best Round of the Year. We have 2 nominations for this, although you could throw a few more in there, but these are the 2 that really stand out to me, is Orobai versus Rebecki Round 3, and Zellhuber versus Ribovich Round 3. Now, both of these fights were a slow burn that led up to this incredible third round. In Rebecki versus Orobai, Rebecki beat the shit out of Orobai in the first 2 minutes and then got controlled in the last 3. Both guys looked like they could have got a finish in that third round. Third round of Zellhuber versus Ribovich, just the culmination of this war, and Ribovich finally finding, measured and repeated success with his striking and hurting Zellhuber over and over. Zellhuber throwing while he's hurt and hurting Ribovich. Absolute barn burner. And for it to get our Fight of the Year and Round of the Year nomination, just speaks to the level of that fight and how much these guys left in the cage. And in my opinion, it has to be Round of the Year for Ribovich versus Zellhuber Round 3. And honestly, that's what put over that fight for Fight of the Year for me. So I'm giving it to Ribovich versus Zellhuber for Best Round of the Year, Round 3. Great job. Now we have Best 10-8 Round, or Most Dominant Round. Your first nomination is going to be Kyle Borralho versus Jared Cannonier in Round 5. Borralho hurt Cannonier really bad, dropped him, and looked like he knocked him out. But in Cannonier's last fight, it was a bit of an early stoppage, so I think the referee let it go a bit longer, and it ended up going to the decision, which Borralho won handedly. But that 5th round was certainly a 10-8. It looked like he could have gotten the knockout for sure. Next, you have Christian Rodriguez versus Isaac Dulgarian, and this is an interesting one because there's 2 10-8 rounds in this fight, and I think both of them have an option for best 10-8 round. Most dominant round. Dulgarian won the first round 10-8. Just absolutely ground Rodriguez into the mat. Third round, Rodriguez beat the piss out of Dulgarian, and that is what won him a very controversial decision. So that certainly deserves a shout because there was 2 rounds and both of them were super dominant. And then last but not least, and what's going to be our winner, is Chase Hooper versus Vyacheslav Borshev Round 1. Holy hell, man. Chase Hooper is a new fighter now, man. In 2024, he looked a completely different fighter. He added the striking, he added the ferocity to his game that we hadn't seen before, and absolutely deserves best 10-8 round, most dominant round. Coming into this fight, we were like, Vyacheslav is either going to beat him up on the feet, Vyacheslav Borshev is a great striker, beautiful combination work, great work to the body. If anything, he has really bad takedown defense. So myself and a lot of MMA pundits were in agreement that if Hooper can get this fight to the ground, it's going to be a very long night for Borshev. If Borshev can keep it on the feet, it's going to be a long night for Hooper. What happened in reality was that it was a long night for Borshev no matter where the fight went. Hooper beat the shit out of him on the feet. He knocked him down in that first round, beat him up on the ground, almost finished him with a submission that Borshev just got out of. And to have him almost knocked out and almost submitted in the same round, you got to give that to most dominant round, best 10-8 round. Congratulations, Chase Hooper, for whooping Vyacheslav Borshev's ass in that first round and earning our best 10-8 round of the year. Next, we have the upset of the year. Now, this is not only for a statistical upset, as far as the odds go, it's also for a dramatic upset. Dramatic and also, just complete victory, I think would be the best parameters for this class. So, now, I'm going to start off. There's a couple of fights that were huge upsets that were kind of like spectacular comebacks and knockouts where the guy was losing like he should have been and then won. The primary example is Shi Ming versus Fang Xiaonan. We talked about that fight ad infinitum on this podcast already, but it deserves a shout for upset of the year. Now that being said, both of those women were not terribly established in the UFC, considering that was the Road to UFC final, was their first UFC fight. So I don't think it really deserves the upset of the year, given the brevity of it, or given the the magnitude of the fight. The other example in that category would be Kong Wang versus Gabriela Fernandez. Kong Wang had one fight in the UFC where she knocked out the girl in like a minute, and everybody thought she was the next big thing. And she fought Gabriela Fernandez, who was a like plus 800, and Fernandez was able to rock her in the second round and find the choke and kill her, essentially. So definitely a shout for upset of the year, but it was a fight that she was losing that she came back in. Next is OSP versus Nzenjoku, and this was one where Nzenjoku is the younger, bigger, more athletic fighter, and he should have beat up OSP, but OSP had some crafty veteran tricks that he pulled out and just kind of outworked and outpaced Nzenjoku on his way to a decision victory. Certainly deserving of upset of the year. He was like a plus 400, plus 500, something crazy, and although it was a split decision, I think he won for sure. Next, you have Tom Nolan versus Nicholas Mata. Tom Nolan was a big favorite coming into this fight. Everybody thought he would steamroll Nicholas Mata, who had been finished before in the UFC, and instead Mata was the one that landed the first heavy punch and rocked Tom Nolan and did not allow him to recover. And for that, he deserves a shout for upset of the year. Next, you have Neil Magny versus Mike Malott. This is another fight similar to the Kong Wang and Shi Ming fights where the underdog was getting beat up for most of the fight until they won. Neil Magny was getting beat up by Mike Malott in the first and second round, and then the third round, Malott got exhausted, and Magny was able to finish him in that third round, and it was an awesome comeback, an awesome upset from Neil Magny. But our number one pick for upset of the year is going to be Ayman Zahabi versus Javid Basharat. Javid Basharat is a very complete fighter. He's great everywhere. His cardio, his IQ, his kicks, his jab, his striking is all well-rounded, and he knows when to use the tools, which I think is his biggest tool. And he's fighting Ayman Zahabi, who you could say the same thing. The guy is really well-rounded, really great fight IQ, but if anything, is a little bit less athletic than Basharat. He's definitely older, like almost 10 years older. And, yeah. What ended up happening, Basharat was like a minus 800 favorite. Zahabi was like plus 6 on the backside, and Zahabi beat him every round. He just whooped him, man. He was just the smarter, better, more explosive fighter. He was able to land the heavier shots. He was able to slip the shots coming back from Basharat. He made Basharat look like a wet noodle machine. And for Basharat, somebody who relies on volume and pace and pressure, coming into that third round where he was down 2, it was like, what the fuck is he going to do? Now he's dead to rights. Like, he's not the finisher. He's not, it was similar to like a Dominic Cruz situation where it's like, what are you going to do? Now you're not going to knock the guy out. You know what I mean? You just tried to for 2 rounds and it didn't work. And what are you going to do? You're going to submit him? You weren't even able to get him down. For me, that has to be upset of the year. Going into the fight, I thought Basharat would beat him in every phase of the fight, and it was the opposite outcome. There was no dramatic moment. There was no crazy comeback. There was no point where the underdog looked like an underdog. He beat him up the whole fight. So for me, that has to be upset of the year, not only because of the statistical side of the odds, but because there was no point where you doubted Zahabi in that fight. And before the fight, we all doubted him. So for me, that makes it upset of the year. Very akin to Strickland versus Adesanya, where it was like, how is this guy going to win? This guy's not going to win. And then he just fucking beats him everywhere. And it's like, okay, well, what can we say now? That's the upset, you know? Congratulations, Ayman Zahabi, on that huge victory over Javid Basharat. Next, we've got one of my favorite categories, and a fun one it's going to be a fun one to talk about, is best losing performance. This is the best performance that a fighter had and still lost the fight. This is a courageous award, a fighter in a fight that, although they didn't get their hand raised, their stock went up at the end of it. Everybody gained more respect for them. Everybody, lauded them for their performance, regardless of how the outcome of the fight went down. And there's a few fights that I think fit into this mold this year. Now let's start with again, Dustin versus Islam. Dustin put on a great performance against Islam, took the champion to the brink, and not forced Islam, but, pressured Islam into needing a finish in the 5th round in a fight that everybody thought Islam was just going to whoop his ass. So that certainly deserves best losing performance. The old dog still had some tricks and was able to show new wrinkles of his game and, put the champion on notice and make it a much tougher fight than everybody thought it would be. Next, you have Ian Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. This is a very recent fight in which Ian Gary made Shavkat look human. Even though Shavkat won that fight, it was a very strange fight because going into the fight, it was like Ian Gary wins minutes, Shavkat wins moments. Shavkat will lose a good portion of his fights and then get the finish. It was like the opposite in this matchup, Excuse me. Shavkat won the minutes of the fight. He was able to hold Gary against the fence. And Gary had the big moments, almost finishing him with that rear naked choke in the 5th round. In a fight where he lost, I think he gained more respect than he ever could have if he had won. I mean, maybe not if he had won, but than you could ask for without winning. He gained a massive amount of respect. A lot of people looked at Gary, myself included, as kind of a flash in the pan or somebody who wasn't ever going to reach that potential. And I think he showed in that fight with Shavkat that he certainly has the makings of a champion in the future. He is just not going to be right now, but in a couple of years, if Gary keeps improving like how he does, if he keeps tacking on tools in his game, there's no reason he can't be the champion one day. So great performance and a loss from Ian Gary. Next, you have Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis, and I do feel like this is kind of cheating, this and the next option, because you could argue that he won the fight, which would make it not the best winning performance in a loss, you know what I mean? Not the best losing performance, but just a good performance in general. That being said, he took the champion to he took Dricus to the brink and lost his belt in a very close fight, so deserves a shout for best losing performance. Next, you have Next, you have Tatsuro Taira versus Brandon Royval. Similar to the last one, it was a very close fight that I felt could have went either way, and it was a split decision. But Tatsuro Taira showed some really interesting, plots in his game. That being said, he was a big favorite coming into this fight, so to give him best losing performance, I feel is a little cheap, because he was supposed to win and he didn't, Next, you have Deiveson Figueiredo versus Petr Yan. For a fight that ended in 50-45, Deiveson Figueiredo made this very competitive. Yan was able to just edge him out in every round, but Figueiredo was in the fight the whole time, even dropped Yan at one point. So, as far as performance in a loss goes, this is up there for sure. One of the best performances in a loss. Following that, we have Khalil Roundtree versus Alex Pereira. You want to talk about a good performance in a loss. Khalil Roundtree, nobody gave him a shot against Alex Pereira. Everybody thought Pereira would smoke him because Khalil doesn't have a grappling game, really. He's never shot for a takedown in the UFC. And Pereira, that seems to be his only weakness. So what is he going to do, strike with him? Yeah, he is going to strike with him. And he's going to hurt him twice. He's going to do good work against Alex Pereira, which nobody saw coming. There was a point where he was behind Pereira and he landed his huge left hook and Pereira sat down, sat him in the chair. Man, I mean, come on, bro. A couple more clean strikes, and we could be looking at a new light heavyweight champion, and what would certainly be the upset of the year. That being said, Pereira came back in that fight, and oh, man, the ferocity that he landed in that fourth round. That fourth round, that oh my God, bro, that finish was incredible. It looked like Pereira could not be touched, and he was just dipping right out of the way and landing huge punches. I've never seen anybody take that amount of punishment, those level of strikes, or that number of strikes from such a heavy hitter like Alex Pereira. So Khalil Rountree certainly raised his stock incredibly in this fight for taking a loss, for taking a knockout loss, and to be heralded the way that he was after the fight. My goodness, what a show of heart from Khalil Rountree, and certainly deserving of the nomination for best losing performance. Next, you have Roberto Romero versus David Onama. This guy had no chance, no reason to be whooping Onama's ass the way he was. He was a minus 1,000 favorite, Onama. He should have, on paper, he should get the finish in the first round. And Roberto Romero was there the whole fight, man. He was fucking giving it to the guy. And although he lost, and he lost on all the judges' scorecards, it was an easy fight to score for Onama. Man, what a performance in the loss, man. Roberto Romero put his name on the map for everybody, and certainly did him and his family and his team a very proud job by putting on that performance against a huge favorite in David Onama. And then you have Dan Ige versus Diego Lopez. Now, Lopez was supposed to fight Brian Ortega, and he pulled out the day of. Dan Ige pulled into this fight on 4 hours' notice. And, yeah, although he lost, the stock again went up insanely because he took the fight on 4 hours' notice. He took the fight on 4 hours' notice. He was in the crowd. And they brought him in. It was like some Santino Marella shit. Huge respect for Dan Ige for taking that fight and for winning a round too. And I mean, although he didn't have any argument to win that fight, just the heart and the, doggedness to come into that fight on such short notice, you deserve a nomination for best performance in a loss. That being said, our number one has to be Khalil Rountree versus Alex Pereira. For somebody who we followed on this podcast, and I followed his whole UFC career, Khalil Rountree, I never thought he would even get close to sniffing the belt. And for him to get that so close to finishing Alex Pereira, one of the best champion of the year we gave him, one of the best champions right now, for him to get that close to finishing him, for his stock to go up so high after that loss, you have to give best losing performance to Khalil Rountree against Alex Pereira. And although I'm sure he'd be much happier with the belt, I'm sure he's very happy with himself after giving in such a great performance where nobody considered him to even have a chance of winning. So shout out to Khalil Rountree for inspiring us all with that awesome performance against Alex Pereira. All right, we have a couple more nominations here. Going alongside that best losing performance, let's talk about the dog of the year. We'll start with Khalil and Alex. Khalil showed incredible doggedness. All right, for the parameters of dog of the year, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. It matters the heart and the determination that you show in the spot, in the underdog spot in particular. And just how much of a dog you are, For last year, we gave it to Mike Breeden against Anshul Jubli because he literally barked at him and was a dog. So for this year, we're giving it to somebody else. Although there was no barking performance, there was a couple of dog-like performances. So that first one being Khalil versus Alex, like we just said, insane performance from the loser or from the losing fighter in Khalil Rountree, and just absolute doggedness from a guy who nobody thought would win. Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint Denis is another one where, Poirier was just a dog throughout and ended up getting that finish because of it. Roberto Romero versus David Onama is another one where the guy, again, had no business to win and instead, was there the whole time showing off that true underdog mentality and, just having a great fight against somebody that he should have been smoked by. And last but not least, we have Brandon Royval versus both Brandon Moreno and Tatsuro Taira. So he has two instances of being an incredible dog this year. Both spots he was plus 300 in, and both spots he got the split decision victory in a very hard-fought fight where he fought tooth and nail with the other guy to earn that decision victory. And in my opinion, that makes Brandon Royval our dog of the year. To beat the former champion in Brandon Moreno, to beat a super hungry and highly touted prospect in Tatsuro Taira. Brandon Moreno left no doubts this year and puts himself in position for a title shot next year and earned our Dog of the Year status for 2024. And next, we have the best prediction of the year. So this was a prediction that we made on the podcast, or that I made on the podcast, I should say, that ended up coming to fruition. First up, we have Ian Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov to go the distance. This was a plus 600, I think, on the betting slip. And I picked Shavkat and Gary to go the distance because I felt like both guys knew each other very well, and both guys are very hard to finish, even though they're both finishers. And the fight did go the distance, so that paid out. Next, we had Mearshart to win by second or third round sub versus Edmund Shabazian. Another one that paid out. Obviously, it's a best prediction, so it has to be a winning prediction. But Shabazian, I believe, was plus 1,000 to win by submission in the second, third round, which I felt like was insane considering how his fights typically go. That's usually how he wins. So, although it was crazy odds perspective, if you know the fighters, it wasn't that crazy of a prediction to predict. And then next we have Ilia Topuria getting a knockout in the second round versus Alexander Volkanovski. This was a fight that I called outright. I thought Topuria would knock him out in the second or third round, and he knocked him out in the second. And it was a great prediction, and I made a lot of money on that fight. So that has to be a shout for best prediction of the year. If we are going by the odds, the winner should be Mearshart versus Shabazian, but I am going to go with Topuria round 2 KO. I was picking Topuria to win versus Volkanovski as soon as the fight got announced. I was picking him to finish 2024 as a champion from June of 2023. I have the bet slip to prove it. If you guys want to see it, I'll show it to you. But in my opinion, my best prediction this year was picking Topuria to do great work and to beat Volkanovski by knockout, which he did. I believe that wraps up our cards. Yeah. All right, so we've went through all the candidates, all the nominations. We've given out the awards. 2024 was a great year for the TKO Nation. We went from 200 subscribers in August to finishing the year with 1,300 now in December. I'm beside myself, and I hope that next year we can continue our path to success. And like I said on the little short that I did and the betting slip breakdown, over the year, we went 148 and 97 with a 60.4% hit rate on our predictions. So let's hope next year we can get that number up to 65 or 70, and let's hope that we can get our subscriber count to 10,000. I thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate y'all. We couldn't do this show without you. You guys are the bread and butter, the backbone for the show. And thank you very much for watching my end of year awards. I will put the timestamps in the bio, and I will cut up the awards by category to make it a little bit more digestible. But I like to put out the long-form content for my people who want to listen to me yammer and yap for an hour or so. Thank you so much, y'all. I really appreciate it. I love you guys. And, let's hope 2025 it's a great year for MMA as 2024 was. And I think we're on to a lot of great things in the upcoming year. There's a lot of great fights to be excited for. There's a lot of awesome fighters that we can see realize gold in 2025. And I'm excited to see how it all shakes out. And I will see you guys same time, same place next year to talk about the end of 2025 awards. So thank you so much, y'all. Appreciate you. Love you. Thank you. Peace out, y'all.